Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we delve into the vast expanse of human experience, navigating the twists and turns of time to uncover the secrets of our collective past. Today, we embark on a journey to the frozen shores of Estonia to explore one of the most pivotal battles in European history, the Battle of Narva. This epic clash of armies, fought on a bitterly cold November day in 1700, would change the course of empires and leave an indelible mark on the landscape of power in Europe. In the late 17th century, the Swedish Empire, under the leadership of the young and ambitious King Charles XII, had risen to become a dominant force in Northern Europe. With its well-organized army, efficient administration, and strategic location, Sweden seemed poised to challenge the established powers of the continent. Meanwhile, the Russian Empire, led by the formidable Peter the Great, was undergoing a period of rapid modernization, seeking to expand its borders and secure access to the Baltic Sea. In the summer of 1700, King Charles XII, determined to assert Swedish dominance in the region, launched a campaign against Denmark, Norway, quickly forcing the Danish king, Frederick IV, to sign the Treaty of Travendal. With his western flank secured, Charles turned his attention to Russia, where Peter the Great was busy constructing a new capital city, St. Petersburg, and building a modern navy to challenge Swedish supremacy in the Baltic. In August 1700, a Russian army, led by the experienced commander Charles Eugene de Croix, began to assemble near the town of Narva in present-day Estonia. The Russians had chosen this location carefully, as it provided a strategic vantage point from which to launch an attack on Swedish-controlled Ingria, a region of crucial importance for access to the Baltic Sea. As the Russian army grew in strength and numbers, King Charles XII, aware of the gathering storm, began to march his own forces towards Narva. The Swedish king was determined to prevent the Russians from establishing a foothold in the region and to assert his dominance over the Baltic. The Swedish army, comprised of seasoned veterans and freshly recruited troops, marched through the snow-covered landscape, braving temperatures that would drop to as low as 20 degrees Celsius. As they approached Narva, they encountered a Russian army that was not only larger in numbers, but also better fortified, with a series of defensive lines and earthworks constructed to protect their positions. As the Swedish army approached the Russian lines on November 20th, 1700, the air was thick with tension, the snow-covered ground crunching beneath the feet of the marching soldiers. The Russians, confident in their defensive positions, had constructed a series of earthworks and fortifications to protect their flanks and rear, while the Swedish army, undaunted by the imposing defenses, began to deploy for battle. King Charles XII, ever the bold commander, chose to launch a frontal assault on the Russian lines, hoping to catch his enemy off guard and exploit any weaknesses in their defenses. The Swedish artillery, comprising some 36 guns, opened fire on the Russian positions at around 10 a.m., sending cannonballs crashing into the earthworks and causing significant damage. However, the Russians had anticipated this move and had constructed their defenses with a series of traverses and redans, which helped to absorb the impact of the Swedish artillery. As the Swedish guns continued to pound the Russian lines, Charles XII ordered his infantry to advance, forming them into dense columns to maximize their firepower. The Russians, numbering around 35,000, held their fire until the Swedes were within range, before unleashing a withering volley of musket fire that sent the Swedish columns reeling. Despite being outnumbered, the Swedish infantry pressed on, using their discipline and training to maintain a steady pace and avoid breaking formation. As the battle raged on, the Swedish cavalry, comprising some 3,000 horsemen, launched a series of charges against the Russian flanks, hoping to break through their defenses and exploit any weaknesses. However, the Russians had anticipated this move and had deployed a series of skirmishers to harass the Swedish cavalry and prevent them from gaining momentum. The Swedish horsemen, undeterred by the fierce resistance, continued to press their attacks, but were ultimately unable to break through the Russian lines. Meanwhile, on the Russian side, Charles Eugene de Croix, the experienced commander, was directing his troops with a steady hand, using his knowledge of the terrain and the Swedish tactics to outmaneuver his enemy. As the battle reached its climax, de Croix ordered his reserves to be deployed, sending in fresh troops to reinforce the Russian lines and prevent the Swedes from breaking through. The fighting continued for several hours, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. until finally, at around 2 p.m., the Swedish army began to gain ground. The Russian defenses, weakened by the relentless Swedish attacks, began to crumble, and their lines started to waver. King Charles XII, sensing victory within his grasp, ordered his troops to press on, urging them to deliver the final blow. As the Swedish army surged forward, the Russians stumbled backward, their defenses collapsing under the weight of the Swedish onslaught. The Swedish infantry, exhausted but triumphant, poured into the Russian positions, securing a series of key strongpoints and gaining control of the battlefield. The Russian army, shattered and demoralized, began to retreat in disarray, leaving behind many of their dead and wounded comrades. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Swedes tended to their wounded and buried their dead, King Charles XII turned to one of his officers and said, "This is a victory that will be remembered for centuries to come." The Battle of Narva, fought on November 20th, 1700, had been a defining moment in the Great Northern War, a testament to the bravery and military prowess of the Swedish army, and the demonstration of the strategic genius of King Charles XII. As the news of the victory spread throughout Europe, it sent shockwaves through the diplomatic circles, with many questioning how the Russians had been so thoroughly defeated by a smaller, but more disciplined Swedish force. As the Swedish army consolidated its victory, King Charles XII began to contemplate his next move, aware that the Battle of Narva was only the first step in a long and arduous campaign. The Russian army, though defeated, still posed a significant threat, and Charles knew that he had to maintain the momentum of his victory to achieve his ultimate goal of securing a lasting peace. With this in mind, he launched a series of follow-up campaigns, seeking to exploit the weaknesses of the Russian army and bring Peter the Great to the negotiating table. The months that followed saw a series of skirmishes and battles as the Swedish and Russian armies clashed in a struggle for control of the Baltic region. Despite being outnumbered, the Swedish army continued to perform admirably, using its superior training and discipline to outmaneuver the Russians at every turn. However, the Russian army was far from defeated, and Peter the Great, determined to learn from his mistakes, began to implement a series of reforms aimed at modernizing his military and closing the gap with the Swedes. As the war dragged on, the Battle of Narva became a distant memory, relegated to the background as newer, more pressing concerns took center stage. As the Swedish historian Voltaire would later observe, the Battle of Narva was the first great victory of Charles XII, and it marked the beginning of his reputation as one of the greatest generals of his time. Today, the Battle of Narva is remembered as a pivotal moment in European history, a testament to the bravery and military prowess of the Swedish army, and a reminder of the enduring legacy of King Charles XII. The battle has been immortalized in countless works of art, literature, and music, with poets and writers drawing inspiration from its heroism and drama. In Sweden, the battle is still celebrated as a national holiday, with parades, ceremonies, and reenactments taking place across the country to commemorate the bravery of the Swedish soldiers. In Russia, too, the Battle of Narva has left an indelible mark, serving as a stark reminder of the importance of military reform and modernization. Peter the Great's defeat at Narva was a wake-up call, prompting him to embark on a series of sweeping reforms that would transform the Russian army into one of the most powerful forces in Europe. As the Russian historian Nikolai Karamzin would later write, the Battle of Narva was a bitter lesson for Peter the Great, but it was also a necessary one, for it taught him the value of perseverance and the importance of learning from defeat. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that to understand the present, we must first understand the past.